Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Ben. I am the Liberal Conservative, and today I wanted to do a short video about the US midterms. We're near enough at the end of the conclusion of the midterm elections, and these elections were a bit like no other. And just for a little bit of context for those who aren't quite up to date with US politics and so on, every 2 years you have an election cycle for the House of Representatives, which is essentially the sort of the soul of the United States government, Congress as it's known. And without going into too much detail, this election cycle is between presidential elections. So you'll recall we had a presidential election in 2020 that was won by Joe Biden. We'll have another election in 2024. And the reason why these are called the midterm elections is because it's for Congress, for control of Congress, and it's midway through an election cycle for the presidential elections. At the same time, you've also got Senate seats running as well. A little bit more complicated with that because it's every 6 years rather than every 2 or 4. It's every 6 years, and they're not all Senate seats are up at the same time. Whereas for Congress, it's fairly straightforward. Every 2 years, all seats up for election at the same time. So it's a bit more simple to go by. Current holders of current party in power in Congress is the Democrats. And the current president, Joe Biden, is a Democrat, and the current makeup of the Senate is Democrats. As common or very typical in United States elections, particularly midterms, is the vote tends to go away from the swing of power and more towards the opposition. In this case, that should be Republicans. They are the party of opposition, essentially. And when you've got things like the economy, which is stumbling along, you've got quite high inflation over there, high gas prices, and so on. It's the perfect recipe for what should have been a really good, strong Republican turnout and showing at the polls, at the midterms. However, it hasn't gone to plan, and there are a couple of reasons why. But notably, the big talking point on all this, of course, is Donald Trump. Donald Trump, you'll recall, is the 2016 presidential winner who then went on to lose to Joe Biden in 2020. Donald Trump, unlike most presidents, when they lose, they leave office and they go off into the sunset or to their ranch or whatever it is they do. Donald Trump, however, decided to stay in politics, arguing that the election was stolen from him and so on and so forth. And we won't get into that into this video, but there's a lot more going on with Donald Trump, with various legal cases that are there against him and so on. But in this particular election, Donald Trump has made this election about himself. He put forward a lot of his own preferred candidates, basically people that he endorsed. Now in America, you have primaries. You don't just have someone run as a party. The party have picked someone to run in that position. You have primaries in let's say, pick a state. One of the districts in Florida, for example, you might have 2 or 3 Republicans who want that shot to run for that one seat. So they go through a primary. They go through an election cycle amongst the party specifically to see who will run for that seat. And over the course of the primaries, as often is the case on every 2 years, you can have a couple of shocks where the person who currently holds that seat doesn't get to run to defend the seat in an election cycle because they could lose a primary to another Republican or another Democrat in the primary selection. And so a prime example of that would be Liz Cheney. She was one of the highest members in the Republican Party. She lost her primary, and despite being in Congress and one of the senior Republicans in Congress, she was unable to run to defend her seat in these midterms because she lost her primary to another Republican. Now, there are reasons why with that, but we won't get into all that now. But just to give you a rough idea, rough scope of how essentially this works. A lot of Trump candidates, a lot of Trump endorsed candidates had run in primaries. Some had won in their primaries, some had lost in their primaries. But the ones that did win in their primaries went through to the elections, And in these elections, a lot of Trump endorsed candidates have fared quite badly. Most notably, being a Senate race in Philadelphia with Fetterman, or Fetterman, I don't pronounce his name right, who is, in my opinion, a weak Democratic candidate. But he was against a very controversial figure for the Republicans, a very controversial figure that Dr. Oz, as he's known as, was a very odd candidate that the Republican Party, I think, would have rather not have. However, he was Trump endorsed, and that endorsement by Trump gave him enough in the primaries, because Donald Trump went to Pennsylvania. He campaigned in the primaries and said, "This is the person who I believe is should run for Senate here." Blah blah blah, and the Republican Party, for the most part, went along with that and elected Dr. Oz as their candidate to run in the Senate race. He went on to lose that race against a weak Democrat candidate, which is call it what it is a failure on Donald Trump's part. It's not good when you turn around and say, "This is the person I believe is going to win this race," and then people will go and vote against that person. It doesn't bode well, and I'm sure you know what I'm going with this here. But back to the midterms, the House of Congress, we won't go to the Senate in this particular video, but the House, the Congress, the House of Representatives, that is what is up for grabs. 218 is needed, essentially, to win. And we'll just bring up a map here just to show you where we are in terms of this right now. Now, voting is still underway, and as you can see, the Democrats. This is by ABC News. 206 for the Democrats, 211 for the Republicans. So the Republicans are leading. However, with the races that are still to go, it's going to be tight. It's going to be tight. I suspect the Republicans may just about win the House, but it will be by a very, very slim margin. Now, what does that mean in reality? Let's go on the assumption that the Republicans aren't going to win by a big majority. 2-3 months ago, Republicans in the polling, 3 months ago, they were looking at 30, 40, 50 seat majority. Even a couple of weeks before the election, they were looking at 20, 25% majority. In the end, they're probably going to land with less than 5 seats, if at all. Now, why is this a fact? Why is this important? What does this mean for Donald Trump as per the title? Well, as I said, Donald Trump has endorsed a large number of these candidates for the House of Representatives who are losing those seats, who are losing their races. And those losses are reflecting Republicans' ability to win what should be, in a mid-election cycle, as the party of opposition, where the party in power, you've got massive inflation, you've got a stalling economy, high gas prices, etc. All of the makeup of the current state of affairs should have pointed to a major big red wave, as it's been called, but it never materialized. Hasn't happened. Hasn't even been a ripple, and that is because Donald Trump is the person who has made himself, whilst his name isn't on as a candidate, it is all but candidate. It is you go and vote for a Republican because you like Donald Trump. And as a result, people haven't gone and voted. It's a case of, well, yeah, okay. And the Democrats, we know that the economy is stalling and inflation's very high and gas prices are high and standard of living is just not very good at the moment. But I'd rather have that than Donald Trump. That is what the message is. Now, if that is the reflection in a mid-election cycle where the vote has always been historically with the opposition, what does that bode? How would that reflect if, let's say, in 2 years' time, when we get to a next presidential election, that the economy is growing again, that inflation is down, that people are feeling better about themselves? If the Republicans can't win an election when you've got record bloody inflation and stalling and all the things that, like I said before, how on earth do you expect to win it when everything's going well? You can't. You just can't. Donald Trump cannot win elections for the Republican Party. It is that simple. Under Donald Trump, they will never win elections. The GOP, the Republican Party, I believe, are now starting to see this. The right-wing media in the United States, Fox News, the New York Post, the Wall Street Journal, etc. That I won't go into the OANs and so on because they are more sort of extreme right wings, but the more moderate right-wing channels, newspapers, media outlets are even saying themselves, it's time to move on from Donald Trump. It's time to bring back proper conservatism. Donald Trump is not a conservative. Conservatives, for example, have always been about strong fiscal control, not having big overspending, budget deficits, etc. Well, the budget deficit under Donald Trump was larger than it was under Joe Biden and Barack Obama. So that's not a conservative way of thinking at all. For example, so my point here in this video, and where the Republican Party are, they have got a decision to make. Donald Trump is no longer an election winner. Donald Trump on the ballot equals lost election. But there's a big problem for the Republican Party, and that is Donald Trump still has a large control of the base of the likely Republican voters. If Donald Trump said, "I'm going to run as an independent in 2024," there will be voters that go with him. Now, Donald Trump wouldn't win an election. In fact, he probably wouldn't even come second. He'd probably come third behind the Republican Party if there was a three-way candidacy for the election for the presidency. However, every vote that he takes with him is a vote that doesn't go to the Republican candidate. Donald Trump's not going to bring Democratic candidates with him or votes with him. The Democrats, and as we see, the independents and the moderates are not keen on Donald Trump. But to put it politely. So, as I said, every vote that goes for Donald Trump, if he ran it as an independent, is a vote less for the Republicans. Every vote less for the Republicans means they're less likely to win an election. So Trump being in the party or outside the party can still damage the Republicans whatever way you go. There is an exception to this, the one exception. And it's an exception that may come into play before 2024. And that is whether Donald Trump has been criminally indicted and potentially convicted. And if he is indicted and convicted on certain crimes, certainly in terms of the Mar-a-Lago documents, we won't go into that in this video, but if that's the sort of indictment and a conviction that can disbar you from running for office. Now, if you are conservative, that may be your only way to save the Republican Party, to save the more traditional conservatives. Now, whether you sit on the left or you sit on the right, I think we can all agree on one thing. You need to have a strong conservative showing, like you also need a strong liberal showing. You have to have, for as good a party to the right, you need a good party to the left, because you have to have that counterbalance, because that counterbalance that prevents either side stretching too far one way or the other. If one party tries to pull to the right, the other one has to counter it, pull to the left, and so on. And in order to bring things back towards the centre ground, because it's the centre ground in any election that is the key vote, it's the winning, it's in America, the registered independents and the moderates. Those like myself, the liberal conservative, the title says it all. I am someone who, like many in that sort of middle area, I am happy to vote either to the left or to the right, depending on the candidates and the policies. I'm prepared to change. I'm prepared to say, you know what, I'll be happy to vote for a conservative person on these conditions, and I'll be happy to vote for a liberal person on those conditions. This is the vote. I'm the sort of voter that you need to persuade if you're going to win elections, because you'll have your base to the right and you'll have your base to the left, and whatever policy, candidate, etc., they will always vote right. They will always vote left. They will always vote, Republicans. These will always vote Democrats. But there's that chunk in the middle that can swing either way. That is where winning elections are. Well, elections are won or lost. You can't win the middle, the centre ground, if you pull too far to the right. You can't win the centre ground if you pull too far to the left. I would say at the moment, the Republican Party, and if 10 was as far right as you can go under Donald Trump, I would say they're towards the 7 or 8 out of 10. They need to come back towards the centre. They need to be more like a 3 or 4. Because at 3 or 4, you still get the vote of the right wing. You also get the vote of some of the centre ground. And it's that vote that wins elections. What we're seeing here, and just to clarify on this, by the way, because apparently you have to, apparently it's needed. A lot of people say, "Oh, but that's a lot of red. There's far more red than blue on there," and that's true. In landmass, there's far more red than blue. However, this one seat here is this one box here. That's one person. That's one election result. Down here, you've got several. 1, 2, 3. Look how many districts there in that one. That's just Montana 2nd district. You've got, and the reason why that is very simple. It's done by population share. Well, down here you've got the likes of Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, etc. Well, they're obviously going to make much down here. Look, California. California, as an example, makes up a massive. You could probably put California has as much population as all of this put together. So when you see all of this red, that amounts to about what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just as those there. That circle is 8 candidates. You've got how many districts down here? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I mean, you could have 20 odd down there at least, and 8 of all of that and 20 in this one little spot here. And that is just simply because it's not about land mass, it's about population. The city, the size of New York, for example, is where, the amount of millions of people in New York is more than 5, 6, 7, 8 states you can name, Republican states. So this conception of, oh, yeah, but the map looks really red, so therefore it should have been a red win, a Republican win. It doesn't work like that. It never has done, and it never will do. So as we say, we have to wait now. It's a waiting game to find out where the House ends up. It could end up as I suspect it will end up as a very slight, very, very slight Republican led House. What's that going to do going forward? Not a lot, frankly. Very simple. If Republicans do get a majority, it's going to be by a slender, very small, slender majority. And that's not going to do the Republicans any favor. Why? Because to push things through, they will need every Republican voter. Now, for example, one of the things that the Republican Party has said that they would do if they win the House, we're going to impeach Biden. We're going to bring in. We're going to have a public committee. And we're going to investigate Hunter Biden. We're going to call Joe Biden to testify. And we're going to do this. We're going to do that, and so on. With a small majority, you won't. Why? Because not everyone in the Republican Party believes that's the right thing to do. Not every person in the Republican Party thinks that if you go after Joe Biden, that's going to weaken the Democrats. In fact, if anything, it could actually do the opposite. Look at Bill Clinton and the whole, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. They impeached him for that, and it backfired because the public saw that as a political point scoring game and voted against Republicans. And Clinton actually done very well after that. So it just impeaching someone doesn't always necessarily mean that people are going to go, oh, well, that's it, we can't vote for him anymore. We're not going to vote for them anymore. It can do the opposite. So as I said, the Republicans, if they do get the House, they're going to have such a slender majority. There's very little we're going to be able to do. In order to even push legislation through, you're going to need every Republican vote, and that also might, because you've got the Republican Party split. You've got the MAGA vote and you've got the conservative vote. There are conservatives in the Republican Party. Don't forget they're traditionally a conservative party, so you're going to have conservatives in there that don't agree with the whole MAGA line. and you're going to have MAGA there who want to push through extreme policies, and the Conservatives in the Republican Party won't go along with it. And therefore, because if you've only got a small majority of 2 or 3, you only 2 or 3, therefore, to vote against or to at least abstain and not vote at all, and they won't be able to get things through. So it's not it's not going to be good for the Republicans either way. They've then now got to try and find themselves how to wean themselves off Donald Trump. It'll be interesting to watch. Like a episode of House of Cards, I guess. Until the next time, I am the Liberal Conservative. Take care and I'll see you.